and staff, councillors, and especially the returning councillors from Taupo. Nice to see you all back, fresh-eyed and bushy-tailed, whatever it's called, how it goes. Okay, over to you, Philip. If you could kick us on just with the outlining procedures for this afternoon. Thank you, Philip.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for coming together again today to this workshop. And I'll quickly just touch on the agenda there, but the outcome I would like to come away with at the end of today is to narrow the 4 options of the master plan down to 1 preferred option, and then allow this design team to go away and develop the master plan. At the moment we haven't got a master plan, we've just got 4 options, but that's the idea of it. And I was just going to do a quick update on the process of the project to date, and then hand over to Mornay from Boffa and Shannon Joe from Warranamani, and they're going to take us through the community feedback and take us through the presentation. We've asked for feedback. The feedback closed on the 4 options from the community back in a couple of weeks ago on the 19th of October. So Warranamani have been flat out collating that information, and Shannon's going to touch on that. But we got lots of feedback. We're going to make that feedback available to the community in its entirety following this meeting. So sometime later on this week, they'll go up online for the community to see all the feedback that was in there, with names removed for privacy, of course. So there's some great feedback in there. We asked for feedback on option A, B, C and D, and general feedback. And if you only get a chance to look at one part of it, because there's pages and pages of it, I encourage you to have a look at the general feedback, I guess, because that's where there's a lot of feedback in there, and some quite encouraging sort of feedback in there as well. Just to remind you about the Cultural Precinct project, it's a project that I'm the project manager of, but the sponsor of the project is Gareth Green. The steering group of the project is the senior leadership team, and I've pulled together in the last 9 months or so a project advisory team also. And the project advisory team is made up of department heads from within Taupo District Council, from policy and finance and property and roading and traffic. We've got HR and legal, facilities, reserves, procurement. So we've got a really good mix of councillors to make sure that we're heading down the right track as we progress. We're kind of right on track. We're almost exactly where we wanted to be when we set out back in March. We set out the timeline for the project, so we're right on track. And today's a really good day for us to be able to move to the next stage. And if we just flick to the next slide, I think we've also, as part of the team, we've also brought together some guys to develop the business case for us, and we've got Kent Dustin here with us today. Kent will have an opportunity to talk to us. Kent's from the Howard Davies group, and they're really specialists in the field of building business cases, and the business case will be the document that'll help guide decisions for us, and also be a document that we will use to talk to our external funders about how they might be able to support us through whichever decisions we make. We've also pulled together a cultural liaison team, which is made up of Dylan Tahoe, myself, and Jade Fakaida from Boffa Miskell. It also has Wayne Marriott on board, and Wayne is our an expert in this field around museums and libraries and knowledge spaces. And we've also got Delaney Brown sits on that board with us as well, as advising us as well. He's a really well-respected member of Ngāti Tūwharetoa and is a master carver, and in fact one of his delicately designed tewhatewhas is on its way to Nottingham Cottage because it was presented just last week to Prince Harry. So the project plan and the update. We've got this workshop here today, and the idea of today is to try and narrow the 4 options, or to narrow the 4 options down to 1, which will allow the design team to go and develop that into a master plan and bring it back to us at a workshop on the 5th of December. Based on the feedback that we get on the 5th of December, the idea is that that would be a draft master plan, and these guys would have another week or so to incorporate whatever suggestions come out of that workshop, and then that would become the master plan, and that will be delivered to us prior to Christmas. So we'll understand one of the options. Then we'll be also looking to, and we're just about to engage to get the Tūwharetoa Street car park option developed, because at the moment we've got some good work done on 72 Lake Terrace, which is one of the 3 options, because when we demolished Lake Terrace, that was where we were going to build, so we've kind of got some concept design work done on 72 Lake Terrace, but as yet we haven't got anything done on the Tūwharetoa Street car park. So we're going to ensure that we've got that work together, and we're going to bring that back to you on the 5th of February is a date yet to be confirmed, but we're aiming towards the 5th of February for a council workshop to say, look, here's the 2 Wharetoa Street car park option. Here's the 72 Lake Terrace option, which you've already seen, but a bit of a refresher on that. Here's the master plan option, so we can have another refresher on that, and then at the same time deliver the business case. And then that will give you 2 or 3 weeks to mull over, understand the benefits and the opportunities that come from each of those 3 opportunities. And then we'll be coming back to you on the 26th of February, date yet to be confirmed, at the monthly council meeting for you to select your preferred option, which will become the basis for the long-term plan amendment consultation document. And then we'll be in the community for the months following that in a formal submission process around consultation on the 3 options. There's also a 4th option in there, which is status quo. So we'll also be measuring status quo. Currently we've got 5 or 7 sites around Taupo District Council. So we'll also be presenting status quo as one of the options as part of the business case. So to be clear, today is just an opportunity to narrow the 4 down to 1, which will become the master plan, develop the master plan, accept the master plan later on this year, and then move into next year weighing up those 3 or 4 options together so we can begin to progress forward into a long-term plan amendment. That's pretty much it from me. I think I was going to hand over to Mornay at this stage. And so it's Mornay Hugo from Boffamiscal.
Mornay, good afternoon, everyone. What's that? No questions of Philip, just regarding that little scenario? Councillor Boddy?
Chairman, are we going to get a rundown on the submissions that we've had in regards of a council chamber being or council building being put on the Great Lakes Centre? Is that still being part of the equation when we've set A, B, C or D?
Get the submission and feedback shortly.
Yeah, we're going to touch on the feedback from the community yesterday.
Mornay.
G'day, thank you everyone. I was just going to just run through the process at the moment. So we've obviously had a variety of workshops and public open days through the process, which most of you are aware of and a lot of you have attended. Jade has also been working closely with Dylan and others to go through the iwi consultation. So there's just a brief timeline there of the different parts of iwi consultation that have happened, and that's not finalised yet because there's still a design workshop with the invitation which has been issued, which would be the final sort of step. But basically it started with a hui, with a cultural liaison group at our Discover meeting, hui with 92 Wharetoa, which basically was an introduction to all the master planners, and then a series of further hui and conversations and phone calls and a meeting on site with Hapu to discuss the 4 options and look around site, and some further telephone discussions and so on. So it's been quite a rigorous process and certainly has had its challenges, but it's going fairly well, and I think we just wanted to give you an update on that, and then that final design workshop we will give you some more feedback on once that's happened. Yep. Well, I think that 5th of October was the community workshop, which was an open invite to iwi to attend, so I think that was the thinking behind that. And yep. Yep.
I suppose just to respond to Councillor Park's comments, the work that's gone through is around understanding how they want to participate. So absolutely, take that point on board. But the intent from Council was to initiate a partnership discussion. Subject to your decision around this process, that will ramp up. So at the moment, you've got a whole lot of entities that are looking for their own wharetonga. You've got an entity that is looking at how to bring hapu together as a collective of two wharetua, but actually equally you've got hapu from this end of the lake who have a particular interest in where the sites go, whether it be at in the domain onto 72 Lake Terrace. They're looking for connection, and it's, whilst you may see a lot there, it's around working through to make sure there's a level of comfort in the understanding the process. So it's been more around not localising, but giving the team the confidence to be able to reflect how Taupo, I mean, the pillars that they're talking about is effectively what Hapu have held onto for years. So it's not that they don't want to have councils involved, it's just that we've been supporting the project team to be understanding of iwi's position without throwing them into the fire, as it were. So in the first instance, this is getting us through the gate. Subject to your decisions in the next wee while, iwi and hapu will become greater involved in a partnership, because at the moment there's a wharetonga conversation or a museum conversation by council. There's still yet to be a final decision. So it's one thing to promise partnership until we know where we're going. We're going to hold off and keep you guys. Kapai.
David. Sorry.
Councillor Hickley.
Yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed. You know, I've got the portfolio of arts and culture. You know, what's it about? You know, where do I sit in terms of that portfolio when I'm not involved with a major project to do with arts and culture?
Okay. Anyone answer that, Philip? Like, as in, I would suggest that we're still in the early stages of this whole process, aren't we? Yeah.
I guess that would be my statement. Is we are just in the early stages. So the formal process, as Philip outlined before, would go through an LTP amendment if needed in March, April next year. So we're in the early stages. You're in the place where you're just coming up with which option you go out with. So it's in the formation stage. So it is early stages, and there's at this point it's been, as you know, it's been around the public feedback. You know, so we had those public meetings. We've spoken to a whole lot of different stakeholders. This is the first opportunity for you to receive that feedback, the initial lot. It's not a formal submission process or anything like that, again, because we're in the early stages. So it's just taking those ideas and then you coming up with what your eventually what your preferred option is for that Great Lakes Centre domain option. Even then, there's another couple of steps in the process. So taking on board all of these conversations, but I'd say it is really high level at the moment, and people in iwi hapu very much are struggling to engage too much until they know what our thinking is. So we sort of had to pass a gate to get to that place. But understand and acknowledge what you're saying.
Okay. Right.
So this is basically just a brief reminder of the 4 options which we previously presented. So option A was a combination of a freestanding museum building with the cab and community facilities centred around the Great Lakes area with a central plaza. Option B was a consolidated option where the museum, cab building, community facilities were all clustered together with a shared reception and atrium space joining them all, and then with the cultural plaza sitting sort of to the north-east. Option C was the option where they were essentially looking at replacing or repurposing the library to be used as the cab building, with freestanding new library and museum building and community building with the central plaza connecting them, so the plaza becoming the connecting element there. And then option D was the option where the existing library eyesight building would be completely repurposed or essentially rebuilt with the cab at the second story above that, with library and museum and community spaces at the bottom, and plaza sitting to the south of that. So those were the four options, just a brief reminder of what those were.
So I'm going to start talking now about to Mr. Boddy's, Councillor Boddy's questions about some of the feedback that we received to date from the community. Hopefully everyone can hear me actually. Is this mic clear? Okay. Okay.
Correct. We're live streaming, are we, Mr. Nen? Yes. Okay, cool.
That was a good summary, Morne, of the four options, and I just want to remind everyone that those four options have merits. All four, from the design team's point of view, are strong. In our mind, they also answer, you might recall, the 6 pillars that we talked about earlier on, and also with the needs list, the defined needs list that the community had brought forward. They have strengths, but they also have weaknesses as well. And what we wanted to ask the community was not to say, which option do you prefer, but just tell us your thoughts on the 4 that we did present, and also following the community presentations that we recently done, what you think about the principles moving forward. So we kept it very simple, working with Lisa's team, looking to getting feedback following those community presentations via social media, so via electronically, and also through hard copies as well. So the basic question, tell us what you think. So 524 submissions is what we received, hard copy and electronic wise. I'm going to be honest with you, the team spent around 2 weeks collating and trying to understand what the feedback was all about. You can imagine that they varied in a lot of situations where it was quite hard. We were trying to move from subjective into an objective point of view to be able to help in this conversation, and also help the design team as well as the community understand what was the general feedback from the community on those 4 options. I want to bring this up, and hopefully we get some good discussion later on amongst yourselves and us about some of the core things raised. With an assortment of different views, we had to try and consolidate that all into key principles. So I'm going to use an example where they talked about the heart of a project, and they might be specifically talking in one submission about the entranceways. Then there might be another submission that talked about wanting to feel more enclosed, warm sun, and we summarise that as being that it's important that we get the heart's central space right for the cultural precinct, rather than listing down what we call kind of the secondary elements and the finer detail to what the heart space would be. Because you can imagine that we possibly would have 5,000 points or more that we would have to talk about today. So today what we've done is we've summarised 30 points, 18 in support, and then the remaining is, I guess, questions and concerns about the project. We have hard copies that that Philip was going to pass around.
Clarify what you've just said in regards of the 30 and the 18. Could you just repeat that?
Yep, so once those handouts go through, I haven't gone on screen because I've purposely put the 4 options on screen so I can make reference to them the best I can about the 30 points. What you see in front of you is 1 to 18. The community is supportive of the following issues that I'm about to run through. Then the 19 to 30 remaining points are items that the community have concerns about. Okay, I think everyone has a copy now. So like I said, I'll put the drawings on the wall here so we can make reference to them. And I do encourage that if you are keen to have a discussion about any particular point or want further clarification, let's discuss about it. So the first point about the community supportive of the following. First point, a centralised downtown admin cultural location seen as a great asset to Taupo's community. We felt that a lot of the submissions through the community had focused on a general support, that they were excited about the idea of the cultural precinct. Obviously for this scheme here, we were focused on the northern and the southern domain area, with Tongariro Street on the site. They also appreciate the fact that it's a close proximity to the lake and also a landing reserve in the harbour's edge, and that was quite an important focus as well. Obviously, all four schemes show that and show quite a strong acknowledgement of the site. Number two, a better connection from town to the lake and the river. As I mentioned before, and I was pretty honest when we had our community discussion and part of our on-site walks of the existing site, that we felt from a design team perspective there was a lack of engagement along the water's edge and also along the landing reserve. From we use the term permeability being physical as well as visual. Unless you know the area quite well, we don't want to be looking at signposts or anything to suggest to go down there. So I guess the general public picked that up and said that was actually a good thing to focus on. I would say that all four schemes are looking to activate that, but I would be honest that to say schemes A and B is focusing more on the building types to bring that sense of enticement, especially from the town, towards the lake edge and also towards the landing, because the cultural precinct as well as the buildings themselves start to celebrate that notion. Number three, be bold, be visionary. Now, all four options, I believe, actually do that. Again, with merits and cons with it. But we talk quite firmly. I think also we believe strongly that the council has also been quite courageous to say this is one of the three options that we want to put forward, and we do see potential value in the opportunities that this site offers. Number four, enthusiasm for a bigger museum. And all these options here, working with council, the areas that have been provided have jumped from around 978 to just under 14 to 1500 square metres, is what Wayne Marriott has been looking at with his team in terms of servicing what is required for Taupo. The images in all four options, we are looking at that size, approximately. These are still indicative, and the next step, once we get into a preferred master plan phase, is that we will start to dwell in further into the program of the museum and its connection, if there is an option to that, with its surrounding other facilities. Number five, atrium unifying buildings, connecting existing and new. In all four options here, we've highlighted in blue the atrium spaces. The community have realised that the atrium space being a form of a flexible space, it is one form of defining an entrance into the buildings, but it's also defining also a space that all users can use. So we talked a lot about, and it's highlighted yellow there as well, common amenity area where understanding further there might be other groups beyond the Rotary Club, the bowling club, the tennis club and the other recreation facilities that we could provide a canvas for the wider community to use. That was a general strong support throughout all the submissions, that they saw this as a place of their own and that buildings could actually be part of that as well. Number six, the GLC and the library getting an upgrade, and its existing GLC and the existing library. It was possibly not quite clear in all our four options, and it was highlighted in some of the submissions that option B didn't look like it provided any option at all of upgrading the GLC and the existing library building. That was actually a correction of our fault. In all four options we do see a potential to have an upgrade to the existing GLC and the library. We are going to have Kent shortly, as Philip described, to talk to you about one possible solution through a separate business case to look at it as being part of the cultural precinct, but also be a solution potentially to solve that we could actually upgrade the GLC and the existing library. Number seven, a strong sense of place and being proud of Taupo. I guess we were quite firm about one of the first pillars being Taupo made. That resonated quite strongly, and we felt great support and honour that some of the submissions actually re-acknowledged the term Taupo made. There is a strong love and there is a strong passion for this existing site, and they are very mindful about what we do and care about it. Number eight, a place to tell our stories, iwi and heritage. And Councillor Park is right that, and we are working with Dylan closely and local iwi about making sure the consultation process in partnership with iwi is carried through. And I won't go any further because there's been a good explanation about our next steps forward. But part of that also in all these schemes here, that the cultural precinct as well as the museum itself becoming a vessel for our treasures, our heritage, and Whare Tao's stories. When Taonga one day will come back to its homeland, more thought, more stories, more ideas will be applied into, and it's not cosmetic, it will become part of the footprint into how the master planning and development of the site will be. Number 9, and this is very loud and clear in all the submissions, pretty much 80% of it, was support of car parking. But what surprised us was this term here, that some submissions talked about there was enough car parking on site. When I go through the next phase, there is also a polar opposite to that as well. But we thought it was important to put this down. The other aspect I do want to acknowledge is that there's probably a question, and I probably should have said from the very beginning, the process of how we came from subjective to objective in these points here. And like I said, it was really tough because we didn't want to say that 10% of the submissions made it into this list here. Our objective for listing these 30 points, and we didn't know where we'd get 30 points or more, that it would be a summary to try of a best ability to have all points listed down here. So when we had a larger scheme, as I mentioned before, we would categorize it into the high level points so people would understand that was relative to it. But you might find that point I just raised had 10 issues that were relevant to that point, which we can go into. But we want to summarize today the general gist of those intentions. Number 10, pedestrian friendly walkways. So all schemes, and we did talk with the community that it is important that people are really important for the site and people first. We also understand we want to share this environment with cars and people, so it's a safe and healthy environment as well. They generally supported all options when they talked through the submissions. They were concerned about some options, I think options D and B, where how traffic would be moved from the police area through the site. In all honesty, that is the ability, or that connection of people and cars going through the site back to Tongariro Street. Number 11, try to schemes yet to be developed further with Boffamuskel about the calming effect of cars, people and landscape will bring into the scheme. In our mind, and also through submissions, I think it was generally supported that landscape and open space was focused on quite heavily in all 4 schemes. Number 12, creating an enclosed plaza and village feeling. Not all 4 schemes here were equal. In option A, there is an attempt to create a sense of enclosure, and the enclosure that I make reference to, and also from the community, was the buildings creating shelter and a sense of place and belonging to the site. You might have heard me describe in the past in previous consultations and discussions about feeling vulnerable if we design a space that doesn't have enclosure, and you could be effectively alone in a large football field, which is the last thing we actually want to do for this amazing site. Option A, B and C, probably less so in D, which some of the submissions had picked up on, D had less of a sense of enclosure with the idea of all the buildings or new buildings being consolidated to the existing GLC and the existing library. It meant that the southern domain was quite open, with a heavy reliance on other forms to provide shelter within the heart space. Number 13, plaza could be more bold, stronger, and connection to town. That wasn't a strong sense, but we include that because again it goes back to the point about the plaza space and the sense of enclosure. I think it's the lack of potential details that we had actually shown based on these diagrammatic images here that, yes, going back to option D, there isn't a sense of enclosure or boldness to the plaza, and also its function being more rectilinear makes it more challenging. You might also recall, I guess one of my personal favourite plaza spaces or civic spaces is Wellington Civic Square. I think more recently it's gained some momentum where some other commentators have talked about its merits and how it does create civic presence with council being there and art gallery and other public realm areas as well, and it's a great utilised treasured space in Wellington. Those are some of the key fundamentals, which is key urban design principles that we've applied in all the schemes here, and I would be honest to say A, B and C are very strong in that, more so in C and less so in D. Number 14, the southern domain becoming an inviting and open space. In A, B, C and D, all aspects of the southern domain we look to widen and to grow. And I do want to make this point here clear, is that there has been a lot of discussion about how the bowling club would be integrated or not integrated into here. We have not had a firm view on whether the bowling club should go or should leave. What have we been doing is carefully and methodically looking at clear urban design principles, but more importantly, what do the general public want from the space? It was very loud and clear, more public space. And it was interrogation of the term public. I personally believe in our design team and working with the PAT and the SLT more recently, that the REX aspects do have a place here where it is a place of public enjoyment. We have had discussions with the bowling club, and one of the key pillars that we talked about is having strong connections to your treasured items. And one of the treasured items is the lake frontage, the foreshore, and the lake itself. You also have an amazing northern and southern domain and also township. All those, and not limited to those aspects, are all important elements that want to be connected and celebrated and utilised by all public members. All we ask is that whatever happens to that space where the bowling green is located in the club rooms, it be open to all to use. So what that may mean is that any obstructions such as buildings or screens, perhaps they don't deserve to be there, because it's more important that a playground or other public space that is for children and other community members could be within that space there. So bowling greens could actually be a perfect versatile option there. But I would like to open this conversation perhaps a little bit later about how we can actually make use and work with the local community of what that space will be defined. And I'm going to be honest, we haven't actually started designing what that space will be. It's important to start designing it together and be clear what is public realm. And that's all I would say about that point at the moment. Number 15, which follows quite nicely, is that some of the submissions, I'm not going to say a lot or few, but again, we're trying to get all points across within these points here, that some had actually noted the relocation of the bowling and tennis clubs in the arts centre. Now, it wasn't as simple as saying we want those facilities to be moved. And again, I pull it back to how difficult it was for us to try and move subjective to objective. I'm going to pull an example here where a submission talked about wanting the green space, the southern green space, to grow, and to making sure that that was completely accessible, as I mentioned before, to every member, and not it to feel being privatised. We took that as being that any screens or the bowling club room as being obstruction to fulfilling that comment or that request or that desire from that submission that was requested. So we took that as being the relocation of the bowling green. We may not have got that right, and this is our best attempt to try and move it into that point, but if we didn't actually make that call, we wouldn't know what position it would be, because we didn't ask people specifically, should the bowling green go? Because I think it goes back to the fundamentals again about these key points, whether they are the right fit, whatever use that site should be. And it's actually not about the bowling green at all. It's the question, what should the southern domain be? And part of the master plan strategy here is to grow the southern domain to have more and potentially integrate with these options here, building requirement. Number 16, leaving the tennis club on the Northern Domain. That was, as you noted in some of the submissions, that and possibly it could have come from the tennis club, I'm not quite sure, because some of them were anonymous, about the tennis club staying where it was. Number 17, the Rotary and the Women's Clubs in shared community spaces. That was probably a general talk and discussion about all community spaces as well, and not specific only to the Rotary and Women's Club, but they were submissions specifically to those areas there. There were a lot of notes about the desire and acceptance that they praised the thought about an idea of having shared community spaces. There's been great efforts by the bowling club to open their doors to membership and also their club rooms themselves. I think Bob's had spoken to me about the deck area and the club rooms being opened out, which is great. I think that's a great move to actually bring, and I praise the club himself for doing moves like that. There's also the move of the Rotary and the Women's Club opening the doors for flexible use in their areas. We want to encourage that. We also want to encourage even more that this project can offer new facilities, new state-of-the-art, new integrated mechanisms that can bring all aspects of the cultural precinct together, inside and out. So spaces, we shouldn't just think they're just internal spaces or external. We talked a long time ago about making sure that this cultural precinct is utilised throughout the day as much as possible, 7 days per week in all seasons throughout the year. Number 18, think about the next generation. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think anyone would be objecting to that. So those were the general 18 points that we summarised the best we could as high-level points that people had talked about in support of our proposed 4 designs. Now, moving into the community and some of the concerns that they had. Point 19, mixing of tourists and the courthouse supporters. And I think that's a fair comment to bring up, because we talked a lot about it during our thinking with these 4 options here. Even though part of the brief was not to dwell too much into the courthouse, the existing courthouse and police station, we felt as a design team it's important to understand and to appreciate it. They are to stay, and they do have a history and they have a purpose on the site. So in our mind, the cultural precinct is inclusive of family and friends, and that's the courthouse and the police station. So we are going to be having further consultation with those 2 stakeholders there, but the police have already stated, I guess, to Philip, their general support for this cultural precinct, and there's going to be further discussions about the courthouse. In our mind, the courthouse, I don't want to go into details about their purpose or anything, but they are part of the community. And I think from our point that we want to try and include that, and it's through passive surveillance and through good design that we hope that the ideas of rehabilitation in terms of, perhaps we use the word civic or people-orientated design, actually might serve a purpose through this cultural precinct to actually benefit and support the purpose of the justice precinct as well, if you want to call it that. Number 20, efficiency of the police to get out in an emergency. So further details, with working with Boff and Miskell, we are going to go into further details about understanding how we move through the site. We have heard from the police that they don't go 100 kilometres per hour outside the site because they are mindful of people, but we also need to understand how, in terms of their program, when there's times of emergency, how they would, I guess, evacuate from the site to get to their destination. And we are making sure as a prerogative that safety within the site through cars and people is an utmost importance. But we also need to understand that splitting up the travel routes may actually help in the situation of safety. Number 21, the new road at the landing reserve. So some community members had picked up our proposition, I hope you can see on the screen here, that we had suggested, and I talked openly in the community consultations about movement through the site as a shared laneway, but also through this area here that I'm pointing to, along the landing reserve and down to Ferry Road, as another alternative route. And again, trying to take the pressure off a single point. They also can actually go around this way as well, back along the Northern Domain. We think that taking the pressure off a single zone will actually help ease the, I wouldn't say congestion, but how traffic would move through the site. I think Council also talked about in the past to the design team that under one of the plans it had always been suggested that a road be designated in that area there as well. Number 22, not enough car parking. That was very loud and clear. We picked it up through the consultation period, and it was also raised by yourselves in our previous meeting that we need to treat car parking as a high priority for Taupo and as part of Taupo Made. So in all these options here, we talked about the minimum number that is already on site being maintained, but also having additional car parking on site to accommodate the new uses on the site. I'm going to bring it up now that in our meeting not that long ago with the project advisory team and the SLT team about the car parking, we actually spoke, I think, an hour and a half, nearly 2 hours on this particular issue, because we knew we needed to make sure that what we talked about today was convincing. The first statement I would make is that Bofamisko Warramani is going to be developing further information in more detail. Mornay will talk to you more about that shortly, about how cars can work with people. And it is easy, and it's not easy at the same time, just to talk openly and verbally to say, don't worry, but it's not about that. So rest assured that we are going to be providing more details to explain and to justify how those two environments or those two characters can work together. But one thing that in our last meeting with PAT was that we will maintain the number of car parks, but could there be a proposition where there is an underlying fear that the council administration building is going to demand in excess of 160 car parks on site? And it's a fair enough fear to be felt, and we acknowledge that. So part of our discussion last week was, could there be an option where the status quo at the moment, and generally felt by council members or council staff, is that parking is not exclusive to the staff members. It is. They know that it's not all day, and it's not temporary, but it's not designated for them. It is making use of what car parking is available and using common sense to make sure they accommodate the car parking for their needs. Could there be a scenario where 30 pool cars be nominated for the council staff, and looking at car parking through a management point of view for the site, within the site and all on the bounding edges of the street that we're suggesting for the car parking, be managed, and that process through a time basis, in a way to discourage for those who park 9 till 5, because we don't want this to be a car parking lot. We have talked, and I think it's universally felt in all the submissions, it's a people place, it's a cultural precinct. I guess I was quite excited, and my design team was as well, because that put forward a real proposition, and I'm keen for a discussion if you guys are a bit later on today about that proposition there. Number 23, location of buses, an issue in this location or further away. We have never been firm about an exact location. We put forward in the previous discussion about a possible location, but I think it was loud and clear that feedback from the community and also from councillors that the connection between the town centre and to the site is really important. Tongariro Street is a bit of a barrier with its current character, where there is a lot of vehicular movement. We want to make it people movement and have that stronger connection. So we are looking at, through our development, reducing traffic and introducing parking and potentially moving the buses away. What we are suggesting is, in our previous discussion, was looking at maybe a location on the corner of the southern domain, but it may not be there either. And following our meeting with the PAT and the SLT group, is that maybe we should explore this even further, that maybe it shouldn't even be around this site? Could there be another opportunity to work within the township itself or somewhere else in close proximity to the domain area? I think that was a valid comment to make, and we need to actually have further discussions around the issue there, because we know that the challenges that the coach and the service buses do to Tongariro Street. I can imagine when all buses are lined up one by one, you would effectively block nearly 80% of Tongariro Street, and no one wants that. So we do need to explore some realistic options here. I do think one of the realistic options may be to have further discussion whether an alternative location that may not be on Tongariro Street or within that site here we're talking about is an open option. Number 24, traffic and pedestrian sharing space. Now, I mentioned before about the idea of shared spaces, and we do need to justify that further through, once we hopefully have a preferred solution scheme. But to be honest, the A, B, C and D is still looking at the same idea of shared spaces and the harmony between cars and people. Number 25, quality of vehicular movement and around and within the site. Again, that was very similar to point number 24, it is safety. But again, it's further details about how we can actually bring all those attributes together. And buildings actually have a big play in here as well. When we are surrounded by buildings, we naturally gravitate to the buildings and its frontages. So its purpose of actually building entrances, where buildings start to, people start to spill out from buildings, it naturally becomes a way as a deterrent for cars to speed and cars to be around. I mean, in my mind and the design team's mind, that we would never want to put cars right at your front door to block your entrance, because that would be the most ludicrous thing. But we understand that it's important to get close to your front entrance to make it as easily accessible and safely as well. Number 26, connecting the town and precinct across Tongariro Street. So we mentioned it before. There is a strong desire for that. I won't go through that point again, but stress that that was actually raised quite a few times about that importance. Number 27, isolating the GLC and library with parking and roads. Where this comment was coming from, and is potentially through options B, that we see that, in option C as well. We've highlighted here in white with black outlines the potential of some car parking integrated with landscaping, be the forecourt to the existing GLC, library and fronting the courthouse. Due to the challenges, I'm going to be honest with you, about trying to maintain the number of cars on site, we are having to look at every opportunity we can to put car parking. It is our objective to make sure that car parking, landscaping and urban design is integrated, but in every opportunity we can, we'll need to look at how cars are being put into that location there. We can't say right now whether that is too much until we go into the further details, but I would say this from a design team point of view, and it was through our site analysis, and it will be in a report, and we have openly acknowledged this through the community and our consultation, that right now from our perspective there is a lot of cars designated on the car parking on your site at the moment. We are here and our objective is to maintain the same number. It's not about having miracles or anything like that. Sense of realism needs to come into play here. So we are integrating it and better than what we are today. So we don't want to lump in large lots. We need to break down and have a finer grain of car parking with people spaces and for public and pedestrian movement. Number 28, how do additional buildings add value to green space? It's probably biased that I'm an architect and I have a landscape architect right next door to me, that we've been in the game for quite a while. We see outcomes where buildings actually do offer huge and tremendous significant benefits to the land. Buildings bring people. People bring buildings. Landscape is we need to carefully appreciate it and integrate it. And we think there is a harmony between landscape and architecture if it's been done well. About being people is about being connected to the internal and external spaces. I guess I don't want to go any further than that because I guess it's through the further details of how we can better explain what these spaces will be like. What the community and yourselves have been seeing to date is 2D and very high level 3D bulk and massing. These are not spaces that we would say is a cultural precinct. These are high level indicative diagrams to start to give a general principle idea behind the backbone of nurturing towards good spaces. It is our job and our responsibility to prove to yourselves and the community that these core values that we talk about and translate these 2D drawings into three-dimensional and what we call streetscape points. So when you walk into the plaza space and you look towards the lake along the southern domain and you see the museum, say option A, what do you feel? What do you see? And you might recall one of the pillars that I talked about was pillar 6. It's more than its personality is beyond cosmetic looks. It's beyond beauty. So beauty is really important and personality really lasts. So how we actually create those spaces with architecture and landscape will determine how successful the space will be. Number 29, alternative locations for civic administration and building sort. Yes, I mean, we knew that was coming and we felt that quite strongly, and again, I don't know the exact numbers, but we didn't have to think very hard. We could have instantly written that one down already. So that is a fact. That pressure has been put on in the submissions. And the last point here, which is also fundamental, budgets, costs and rising rates. There is concern about what this project, and to be honest also the other two projects as well, about what sites, about what the cultural precinct in this particular site brings. I would bring it back to also some of the positive points that people actually mentioned, added value. So added value may contradict or may support actually in terms of the point number 30 doesn't have to be taken as a negative. It's also a positive, that value for money, because it is, I guess, your job to make sure money is well spent, and you do continue to spend because it is about improvements and growth. This is potentially a project for dealing with growth and improvement, but to be done well, and to be done well with the community in local iwi. So they were 30 points raised, and again, they were our view from a design team, and we did talk in depth with the PAT and in the SLT team to get their thoughts on, and they generally, in consensus actually, unanimously agreed it was the best way, and you have access to all the submissions online as well. It was actually rewarding, I'm going to tell you this, through our staff to go through those 2 weeks, and it was heavily debated of how these points were raised, and we know that there'll be people analysing these 30 points saying, how did that come up? I couldn't find anything there that's made that suggestion. We're open to that because, like I said, it was our best interpretation to try and summarise all the 524 points, which may not have been so obviously black and white to say that, but we had to look outside the square and make assumptions about how that moved towards that particular category. I am going to move to this as well because what you've just been exposed to is the high level feedback aspects, which deliberately I show 4 options, and high level wise spoke about some of the options that similar points have been raised and been focused on too. We were quite interested to see a statistical point of how breaking down the submissions, what would that give us? Again, this is subjective as well, and we weren't sure we were going to show you this or not, but we're going to show you today because it does, we felt, and if you haven't read the 524 submissions, I recommend you do so, or at least read these again, the 30 points. There was an underlining, an emotional feeling that we felt that from all those that were in support of the options or the cultural precinct, that A, B and C and D were generally supported, and it was quite hard actually to really break down which one was obviously the option that people seemed to support more. It wasn't easy. So that's why we kind of did this, and again, up to interrogation whether we'd done this right or wrong. So the first point here is called no change. So when there was a submission that was very obvious that they didn't want anything touched, they were pretty loud and clear. They didn't want any change. Then there was a no admin. So as you might recall, the Residents Association is one party, and we put in brackets here, do not support the admin buildings. So we received quite a few of those submissions. We also received some submissions that just didn't have any comment at all about the options or further input about it in terms of administration building. Then the third point here is about supportive. Strong support or general support, just general support for the cultural precinct. Then there was, I guess, a miscellaneous where it was undecided, where comments, there wasn't enough information they felt from the master plan or the consultation process, and they felt they couldn't respond to any feedback to anything being presented to date. So what you see in front of you here is focused only on the submissions that were in support of the cultural precinct. And I'd like to further explain the term support. So support is an obvious yes, that we want the cultural precinct to happen, and one of these options. But there may have been, which we've taken as support, is a maybe. So the maybes are where, I'll throw an example here, where someone has given strong indication to option B, in this case here, and added some caveats to it, some conditions, where we don't quite feel satisfied or convinced that the front entrance to the museum is in the right location, or maybe the buildings that you've consolidated towards the landing reserve could be moved a bit more to the township. We took those as not minor but secondary elements, but generally suggested support for that option. So the yes and the strong maybes were put in front of you, and these are our tallies. And as I mentioned before, all four options are very close. I mean, out of 524 submissions, and you're looking at just under 20 difference between B versus A and C. It's a pretty close call. This is why we were a little bit reluctant in showing you this, because it doesn't mean it's absolutely clear, option B. But I would like to leave you back to that, if going through the points here, and also through this statistical, we're trying to find some explanation to help yourselves today in terms of an overall summary of where the community lie and their views. And I know just that statement alone that I just made, the community views, I know there'll be backlash, and I can feel it already, to say that's not my view. But again, we've done our best to try and summarize all views, all 524 put forward. We haven't got anyone that just spoke verbally down the street. They had the opportunity, and we've taken all those comments within this. So the best part is that, and sorry, I deliberately took some time to go through these 30 points, because those 2 weeks was hard for us, and I wanted to explain thoroughly. And please, if there's any questions about it, I'll do my best to try and explain it. I haven't put the spreadsheet of algorithms and everything that our poor team tried to work this through, because it's not easy. Now, I actually don't think the right answer is about stats. It's actually about the feedback. And the feedback is important to actually steer to the whole point about this project, is making sure that those 6 pillars and the voices and the opinions expressed by the community is well executed if we pursue with one of these options today. I might pass you to Philip to guide this next step, but also probably to mention one apologies from Councillor Rosie not being able to attend today and her views.
Probably a good time to just introduce Kent and let Kent just have a little moment here to talk about the business case and how that might intertwine with the master plan and how that's going to help support some decisions that you're going to need to make early next year about the preferred option of the three. But Councillor Harvey, I met with just prior to this meeting. She's away today, sends her apologies, disappointed she can't be here, but she wanted me to share her feedback because in Rosie's opinion, option D is her preferred option, and she's given me 5 bullet points that she wanted me to share with you all. And in her opinion, option D is the least disruptive of the 4, and she was referring to Rotary House and the current museum and those current buildings, is the most likely to attract external funding, has the greatest potential to gain efficiencies in construction, will help enhance the current building stock. She's talking about the GLC and the library specifically, and in her opinion will create a hub. So option D, and I just not sure if there's some stuff, but specifically because Rosie's touched on funding here, Kent, I wonder if there's an opportunity for you to maybe just have a quick talk about your process, and then we'll open up for
I think just before that, Phil, if you don't mind,
yes.
The submissions here that Shannon's quite eloquently explained all or summarised all. Does any of the councillors have any questions regarding these submissions? Yeah, I think it's probably before we go into business cases and whatever.
Good.
You've outlined Rosie's scenario there, but is there any questions, councillors, on the submissions? You have the 524 and summarised by our consultants here today. Do you have any comments on that, or do you have any queries regarding those submissions?
I'll kick it off.
Councillor Motti.
Pretty close to the door. I said way back in the day, and I think another councillor may have said something very similar, I was all for not using the word cultural precinct, but having something done with our museum in regards of the state it is, the ability to show what's in there that can't be shown because of size. And I'm just wondering whether our consultants have actually taken into account, we're talking about a recreational reserve. Now, a recreational reserve can be, with good planning, it can be something of significance without a building. I'm totally opposed to administration building there because it is a recreational reserve. And that's not mentioned in any of the points that have been out here at the moment. You made a comment in regard to the courthouse. It's rather interesting. I just read recently about troubles in Rotorua in that particular part of their CBD because of the courthouse being there. The other thing I'd like to factor in is our 2050 discussions we had recently for predictions for population, and there are actually quite a number of other things that I believe that we should be looked at. Quite frankly, I think it's a nonsense to proceed with a certain one A, B, C or D when I believe it's quite clear that a building should not be on that reserve. And way back in July, I think it was July, September, I'll just check it. Back on in 23rd of September, I sent an email to Lisa in regards to the way we were doing things, because what we did, we put it out for consultation. I supported it so that people could say yes or no, because having a lone voice was a waste of time. We never ever said to the population, do you want a building there or not, yes or no. We're spending hundreds of dollars doing what we're doing at the moment, and I think we need to make the decision whether it goes. In fact, we need to make the decision whether we need a new council building or not. And there's some information stacked up even back in July at an Audit and Risk Committee meeting, I think it was, as the Maylene is not to. I believe we put it around the wrong way. I believe we should be looking at the transport strategy first with the bridge, etc., and then maybe look at where we need to go. And the reason I talk about our building is the fact that I think it was at a meeting of I'll just mention it if I can find it. It was at the Audit and Risk meeting back in July, and I think it was to do with the staff survey, where the concerns in some areas since the last survey in 2015 of what was happening on a national level, e.g. conversations about amalgamations. That's real. In Brighton and Brisbane, Australia, that happened. We also have the issue of the three waters, which may be taken over on a national basis, so we don't need a building as big as what we're planning. So all I'm throwing out there, I'm totally opposed to a building on the reserves, but I'm also quite prepared to get down and make that reserve a reserve of significance. You don't have to go far overseas to find some that are, and we can follow suit. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any other questions or queries of the submissions before we go on? Yeah, Councillor Kingy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, gents, I wonder if you, I haven't seen it anywhere, but if you could sort of expand on um, how spread their feedback was in terms of the district. So what's coming through pretty strong in here is the Taupo-centric view. Just recognising our smaller communities, Tūrangi, Mangakino. Just wondering if you can put a lens on what the engagement, what the feedback was from those communities as part of this process.
The best person probably to talk to that is probably Lisa. We have received the feedback via online as well as hard copies, those who submitted in the council reception, but maybe you can talk to how wide it could.
So through you, Your Worship, the survey was sent to all of the residents associations throughout the district, so right around the district. It was anonymous feedback, so people didn't actually have to put in their addresses, so we don't have any figures or hard facts around that. That we were expecting that would come as part of the next consultation process.
Okay, so anonymous.
However, Philip may like to speak about the consultation events he held in both Tūrangi and Mangakino.
I can say that in Mangakino we had 50% higher turnout than in Tūrangi. In Tūrangi we had 2, and in Mangakino we had 3 turnout for the public consultation workshop. They were all supportive, 100%.
Okay, Councillor Park.
Yes, thank you. With the road down through to the landing reserve, is that even an option? Because isn't that part of the treaty settlement land?
So you're absolutely right in many ways. The land which the road goes onto is going to be Te Whare owned post settlement. The road has always been proposed in our plan, so CISP, the Commercial Industrial Structure Plan, had that as a key route. But you're right, you can only influence it up to your boundary, and then from there that's up to the property owners in that place. Now, slightly different because that reserve is going to be managed as if it, or that place is going to be managed as if it was reserved, so there are some influences that you could have around particularly funding if that was a priority to put that road through, which to date it is, it's in your policy as a priority. And also depending on what development happens, you're aware of Te Whare aspirations for part of that land, then that would incorporate some of that through.
Just to clarify that, Gareth, so that's a road continuation from the over the hill, over the hill to the boat harbour. Yep, cool. Okay.
In some way.
Okay, Councillor Hickling.
Yes, thank you. Philip, I know I've spoken to you about this before, and for me to pick either one of those, I would have liked to have seen an overview of those plans on what there existing now, because for me it's quite difficult, should we say for C, to see how far that museum and those buildings extend into the South Domain, and likewise probably A. I find it a little bit difficult to just assess those, because there is a suggestion that there is more open space or green open space when I consider some of those are taking up green open space. So have you got the facility on this to give me some idea? Because otherwise I can't make a decision.
I can just give you some feedback there. So on the option C, which projects the furthest south, that projects onto the unused bowling green. So none of those options actually cross the boundary line of the existing bowling club. We don't at the moment have the overlay images with us, I don't think. But yeah, so well, that's the only one we. But the boundary, at no point do we cross that boundary. Yeah, they're further back.
Correct.
Yep.
None of them involve removing the big oak tree which sits.
Just to help you back.
You know, we've got to understand
no problem to provide that for you at all.
I think what Morne's saying is that option C there, the red, obviously museum, is on the, it encroaches onto the unused bowling green.
That's correct.
Where we've stood on our site visits.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. So that is the, out of all the options, that's the furthest south.
That's further south, yes.
Okay.
And the reference to that oak tree, or whichever tree that is, so the reference to that is just to give an indication of how far to the west the boundary is. So it's all west of that tree, was to give you an idea from that perspective.
Yeah, no, it's
Thank you, Morne. Yeah. Thank you. Sure.
yeah, we used that to when we did the drawings. It's there as a layer. It's just switched off just to simplify the image a bit.
Okay, Philip. There's no other questions regarding submissions? Okay.
For a lot of them, you'll see that there's contrary views, and that's because that's the reality, is that people in the community have contrary views. There's those who want the administration building there, and there's those who don't. There's those who are concerned about car parking. There's those who think there's too much car parking down there at the moment. Ultimately, it's going to be your job to make those decisions. But I'd say, it sort of comes back to Councillor Boddy's point at the start, is that what I would say is that those decisions should be made later in the process, when you have the formal submissions and the opportunity for people to come in here and sit in front of you and explain their thoughts. So remembering that all you're doing through this initial stage of the process is finding the forerunner to go up against those other three options. So there's still that formal submission process, when just those gelling out of, what do you mean about the lack of car parks? Is it that there's, you can get to the bottom of those statements. So that comment, and you're right, events do need car parking in the vicinity. That discussion though was around, are we in the business of providing a car parking lot for our council staff outside a council building, regardless of where it goes, whether it's there or one of those other locations in the town centre. And the answer we got to as staff was no. Why should we be more special than the average person in the town centre and the average retailer or office block in town? We're currently all parking in town, and we have been since we relocated into town. And as you know, we all treat the town centre like a pool of car parks, and ultimately you find the closest, most appropriate timed car park to the place that you want to go to. At the moment, that means that my staff are mainly parking on this side of town, because most of our buildings are on this side of town. When we go to that side of town, then naturally the pressure will start to go there, but it will free up car parks on this side as well. And you can manage that through time restrictions. If it becomes an issue in one area, then you can put limited time restrictions in, which then it will modify the pressure somewhere else. So it's an opportunity to play with that. But the key fundamental bit of it was, we didn't feel that we needed to provide a car park per staff member in the immediate vicinity, because my staff walk now, and why should they be any more special than anybody else?
I think it's just been very clear as a group what the priorities are for the use of that space. And for me, that 30 pool car conversation is just to say there's many different ways we can skin this cat. Let's look outside the square to find some solutions to help address some of these concerns if we proceed down this path.
Okay, Philip.
Probably a good time for Kent to come and talk.
Kia ora, Mr Mayor and councillors. My name's Kent Dustin. I'm from the Davies Howard Group. We are specialist business case developers, and we are working with Philip and team on this project to develop the business case that wraps around the master plan that you're having a look at today. We use Treasury's Better Business Case methodology. We typically develop between 20 and 25 business cases a year. Those are about 50-50 split between local government and central government. We typically work on business cases for investments ranging from a few $1 million through to a few $1 billion, addressing minor issues such as the Auckland housing crisis.
Sorted that, haven't you?
Very straightforward. The methodology, the Better Business Case methodology is broken into 5 cases. The very first case is the strategic case, and it sets out the problem and really asks the question, why should you do something rather than nothing? The base assumption in any business case is, what happens if we just do nothing? Why is doing something better? From there, the business case then analyses what are the best options for doing, for addressing the problems that we've identified, and then how would we go about it, and then where would the money come from? So it's a very, very structured process, and it interacts very well with the master planning process that you're engaged in. I have to say, from the point of view of the number of business cases that we do and the number of local authorities that we interact with, the quality of work that Taupo has done to date is exemplary. In terms of your thinking about the master plan, the work that you've done around thinking about the options regarding GLC, the strategies that you have, the clear focus that the community has, really makes this council a complete standout compared to what we would normally see when we came in the business case process. So you guys are a lot further ahead in your thinking than most councils would be at this stage. The challenge of that, of course, is that it introduces a little bit of confusion about what's meant to happen in the business case and what's meant to happen in the master plan. As I said, the very first role of the business case is to say, why should we do something rather than nothing? And that piece of work is being done at the moment. So once you get past the idea, once you get through to the idea of saying, yes, we need to do something or other, the next question becomes, well, what should we do? And there's a whole range of options that are there. Now, in most cases, there's no master plan to inform that process. And so a large community debate ensues because there's no clear idea of what the something looks like instead of the nothing. And that's where the strength of the master planning process that you're engaged in lies. And the fact that you have created a draft master plan, that you've gone out to the community and you've begun that engagement and begun those discussions, bodes very well for how the business case then proceeds. So, the business case, the first part of it, why should we do something rather than nothing? The draft of that is with Philip and the project team at this stage. And you folk will see that for around about the 5th of December for that meeting. So that first part of the business case, you'll see it will be about 80% finished at that stage, and we warmly welcome all your feedback, your thoughts, your suggestions on what's contained in that document. When it comes to the next part, which is exploring the options of what should be done, effectively that's informed by the master planning process. So it says one of the options is to undertake development on the domain to develop the cultural precinct. The business case does not assume that that's going to happen, and it's up to you folk as the key decision makers to decide whether that occurs or not. And within the framework of that, the location of the cab building is absolutely on the table as part of the business case. Now, the challenge at the moment is there's a bunch of options being talked about for where the cab building should be located, but those are not being informed by either the costs or the benefits, because that's the function of the business case. So the business case will go, of all of the options, essentially we've got 3 options for where the cab building can land, as well as the default option of do nothing. So do nothing at the moment assumes that the council just remains in its current configuration. There's Lake Terrace, there's the Tuwharetoa Street car park, and there's the cultural precinct. Now all of the work to figure out which of those options makes the most sense in terms of costs and benefits is underway at the moment. As Philip's outlined, Warren and Marnie are working on some of the costings for that around the Tūwharakatoa Street car park. All of the benefits work to do with that we'll be doing in late December and through into January. So when it comes to you, when the full business case arrives, you can look at those things in an objective sense. And you can go, what is the sensible decision? Now the business case will always, as Treasury obliges us to do, we will come out with a preferred option. But that's only a recommendation. It doesn't oblige you to do anything. You can do nothing. We have written business cases, specifically for some territorial local authorities, that have said, don't do this. It's a bad investment, don't go ahead and invest. We have had other processes where the preferred option has been altered because the local community wanted something a little bit differently, and that was an entirely valid process. And the whole purpose of the business case is to essentially make sure that everybody, when having that debate, is working with the same information. The other thing that the business case does is it deals with the implementation options. How should we stage this thing up? Should we build it all in one go, or should we do it progressively, and how would that, kind of work in terms of the options available to us? And the final thing that it does is it says, where's the money going to come from? Now, in thinking about how and where this would get funded from, our analysis was that we have proposed to Philip and the project team, which was endorsed by SLT this morning, that we should end up with effectively 2 business cases. These have a common strategic case, so essentially saying why should we do something rather than nothing, what's the problem we're trying to solve, is common to the 2 of them. One of the business cases deals with a cultural precinct, and the other business case deals with the GLC and potential changes to GLC. Now the reason, our logic kind of goes like this. The current government, the new government is wanting to make sure that all of the projects are aligned with the 4 well-beings. That's social, cultural, environmental, economic. You guys have seen all of this, it's all known territory. For the cultural precinct, there is very strong alignment to the social well-beings. There is very strong alignment to the cultural well-beings. But in fact, there's next to no alignment to economic well-being. It would be drawing a very, very long bow indeed to say that if we make the museum better, particularly from the point of view of Taupo itself, that lots more people are going to flock to Taupo just to see the museum. They'll probably go and visit the museum and do other things, but it's not terribly likely that we're going to see lots of economic activity from it. On the other hand, the proposed changes to GLC could have quite large-scale economic benefits, simply because the events and conference market, as you know, it drives visitor nights into the town. The other thing that kind of development does is it can provide a catalyst for commercial development elsewhere. So it can provide a catalyst for hotel development, for retail development, for a bunch of other things. There are a bunch of flow-on effects. These effects are fairly well known and they're fairly well modelled. So when it comes to funding for the various development elements, essentially we took the view that the funding sources that would be available for the cultural precinct are likely to be somewhat different to the funding sources that would be available for the GLC development. And they could end up on quite different tracks. And they could end up with quite different decision mechanisms. So for instance, there might be very wide support in the community for a quick decision on GLC and simply press the button on that and let's go see if we can find some money to get that underway, because everybody commonly agrees on what needs to be done and why. On the other hand, the cultural precinct, as some of the discussion today has illustrated, is there could be a much wider range of community views, and that needs to be explored in more depth, and a bunch of other things need to also be discussed, such as the reconfiguration of Tongariro Street and these other aspects of the wider project. So a recommendation was that in fact we do this as 2 business cases in parallel. Now you'll be happy to know that there's no additional cost in doing that, and that's because the council is so well developed in its thinking, and the quality of work that has gone into this project to date has been of such high quality. So both of those business cases will come to you in about 80% finished form around about the 5th of February. And that will give you essentially the container into which you can then place the master plan. So essentially it will say, this is why we should do something rather than nothing. Here are all of the options that are available, and here's why we think the preferred option is a particular configuration. And that we haven't done the analysis yet, so that configuration may include the cab building being someplace entirely different to on the domain. And you'll then have an understanding of the costs and the benefits and how that gets done and how it gets funded for those options. So does that sort of explain a little bit about the business case process and how it fits together with the master plan?
Yeah. Option D, which encompasses quite a bit of the Great Lakes Centre, you'd not see as that is one business case?
From the point of view of the business case,
yeah.
Options A, B, C, and D they are entirely neutral, right? So it is likely that the costs and the benefits will vary a little bit within those 4 options, but not to a great enough extent to really influence the returns. If you were to look at it from the point of view of the GLC, none of those options would necessarily result in a higher number of conferences or visitor nights. So it's a bit of a wash. If you look at it from the point of view of the business case for the cultural precinct, none of those options are necessarily going to make big changes in terms of the social or cultural well-beings that result, with the caveat that, of course, we need to get the museum right, because that becomes a key facility. Right? We need to get the library right, because that becomes a key facility.
With your previous history of business cases, museums been the sole standing operation like Lenlai, Napier, things like that. We are now hearing they're losing thousands of dollars a year because they're just an independent, separate location. Any comments around that?
That's a very, very good question, Mr. Mayor. The world is moving to multi-use. Right? So those kind of facilities where the community can get wide use out of, and diverse use out of buildings that we previously wouldn't have, we would have had as standalone, facilities, has changed quite dramatically. And there's probably two really good illustrations. One is the curse of the badminton hall, where different sports go through kind of different fashional moments, right? I mean, we've all seen this happen. We all have golf clubs sitting somewhere, and now we have bikes. The curse of the badminton hall is that it's a purpose-built facility that really only serves one sport, and as that sport waxes and wanes, council gets stuck with maintaining and operating these buildings that can have quite small user bases. When in fact what council wants is a multi-user facility that, if this sport is going through a bit of a boom moment, we can accommodate that, and when it kind of tails away and people want to do something different, then the building itself doesn't have to be, we can reuse the building in sensible ways. Another good example is in the reuse of community spaces, because again, a lot of councils have community spaces that are not necessarily well utilised, they can be expensive to maintain, all of those sorts of things. In some of the urban centres, we're now seeing a move for council facilities to be used by community groups outside ours. So there's very meeting rooms that we all depend on day to day to get our work done, become community meeting spaces after hours. Right? And it makes it very, very cost effective, and also provides a driver for some kind of integration between the community spaces, the social spaces, the cultural spaces, the administrative spaces. Yeah.
Thank you. Ken, any other questions of Ken? Yeah, Councillor Johns.
Sure. Good morning. Oh, good afternoon, Mr. Dunstan. My name's Roseanne. I'm just digesting the conversation that we've just had about 2 different business cases, one for the cultural precinct and one for the Great Lakes Centre. Now, I'm not a better business case writer such as yourself, but my one thought that came to mind is you talked about, first point, about the economic impact of the cultural precinct for this district. I would just encourage us not to undersell that, because in a lot of the consultation and conversations that we've had, we talked about tourism, and we talked about Taupo made in our identity, and that cultural precinct is a big part of it. So I would encourage us not to undersell that in terms of one of the 4 well-beings that that business case delivers on. The other comment I just wanted to add, and I just wondered if you were exploring other options, whether you had considered an option where our administration building was not part of the cultural precinct, but the elements that came together for it were our arts, were the museum, were our recreational facilities, were the Great Lakes Centre. Did you look at that? Was that part of this conversation and consideration?
Those are very good questions, Councillor. Let me address them in turn.
I know there's a lot.
Yep.
It's just when you said Great Lake,
Yep.
I just thought somewhere.
Yeah, look, it's a good question. Just in terms of economic impact from cultural facilities, when we go to hang our hats on some economic benefit, we generally need to have a reasonable amount of supporting material that says, yeah, this is actually the case. What the research and the academic literature tells us about facilities like this in New Zealand is that they don't in themselves generate more visitor nights. What they do is that they generate substitution. So a good example is, let's look at a purely commercial project, the Ruapehu Gondola. Right? Now, in the economic modelling for the Ruapehu Gondola, only 10% of the visitors are expected to have an additional visitor night to go to the gondola. What's actually happening is that people arrive in a town and they go, their itinerary says they have 4 days or they have 5 days because that's the time they've got off work. And so what they end up doing is making a decision about which facilities they are going to go and visit, what they're going to do with their time, effectively. Now, that doesn't express itself in extra visitor nights. There's not much we can actually hang a hat on in terms of economy. But to your point, it does change their perception dramatically of Taupo the place, right? And it helps build that sense of place for this town and this region. So you tend to find a higher degree of some of those softer factors, such as, I had a better understanding of the social environment, I have a better understanding of the culture, I perhaps want to come back here again. Right? So there's subtle effects, but they are there and they won't be ignored.
Okay, and I guess I'm just trying to think a bit wider that the opportunities that this might give us as well, because we talk about our vision of being the heartbeat of the Central North Island, and for me, we have opportunities to almost be a centre of excellence here, and that is about industry and attracting business to this community as well. So let's not just look at our economic benefits in terms of extra visitor nights or a larger share of wallet or however you want to carve. I think there are some opportunities we'd be remiss not to look at. Does that make sense?
Yes, I concur. Yeah.
You concur?
Yes.
But the other one about my option, did you consider other options?
Yes. So in that sense, the option analysis. So we haven't done the option analysis yet. We're just beginning that work in the coming weeks. The option analysis will look at the location of CAB, independent of the cultural precinct. So you could make a decision to proceed with the cultural precinct with CAB someplace else, right? Bearing in mind, of course, we haven't done any of the costs and benefits with that, and what we are going to present you with in February is here are the numbers, how they stack up for those different approaches to where the buildings might be located.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hickling? GLC business case is based on what?
Yep. The cultural precinct, the new museum, the administration of, and probably a little bit of tinkering with the GLC and the library, but we haven't talked about
And I get, to further that, what's the scope for that? Yeah, what are we talking about? Yeah.
That's a very good question, Councillor. So, yeah, let me kind of unpack that a little bit. The first is any changes to GLC would happen in the context of the master plan. And as Shannon and Co have talked about, some of the options allow the linking of GLC with atriums. They change the way that you interact with the building, you know, those sorts of things. Now, obviously, if we were doing that amount of work, it would be remiss of us not to look at making sure that GLC is as fit for purpose as we can make it for the years ahead. It would be a little bit like, you know, renovating the entire house but leaving the living room untouched, you know. So the purpose of the business case is to say, what can we do cost effectively to GLC to make it more fit for purpose for conferences and events, which is where we are definitely missing out at the moment, whilst acknowledging the fact that as a theatre it functions very, very well, and it is a very good theatre, and I don't think anybody is proposing making changes to that part of the building. The limitations seem to be, from the discussion, the meetings that we've had thus far, around how it's difficult to move out onto the north domain from GLC, and the way that it's configured at the moment is not very conducive to running the sorts of events and conferences.
But also including a do-nothing option. So
also including a do-nothing option.
That's always, so all the business case does essentially is give you the decision-making tools to be able to say what from nothing through to whatever makes economic sense. A total rebuild without having done the business case probably won't, I would have thought, but this will give you that cost and benefit so that you can make a reasoned decision based on evidence rather than just gut feeling.
Yeah, and that's a very good point too. So essentially, the business case will include the option to do nothing to GLC. It'll have a range of options about what could be done to GLC, and those will range from the sublime through to the ridiculous. And one of the options will be bowl the place and start again, which of course on a quick back of the envelope would say, well, that doesn't seem to make any sense and I wouldn't expect that to survive the process. Right? But the whole point is to say, if we've decided to do this but not that to GLC, it's based on some analysis that says, here's what we're likely to get in terms of bang for the buck and value for money.
What the government really wants, and when you're going for funding, is to make sure that your decision making has logic behind it, which is the concept of the case.
And based on that logic, I think it would be remiss of us not to take into consideration all the work we've done for the master planning and what's come through from the community about how we use those shared spaces. I personally would be very disappointed if we only looked at the GLC on the basis of let's get a bigger theatre and some extra conference facilities. I think we'd have missed a trick if we do that.
That's a very good point, Councillor. There's a kind of a multi-step process that we go through here. First says the master plan goes, let's make sure we've actually got a plan for what this is going to look like, right? Because it's very difficult to go out to the community with a business case and they go, well, what is it we're buying? We don't know, we haven't done that work yet. So the council's to be commended for going as far as it has down the master planning track, right? So the master plan informs the business case. The business case goes, let's do something rather than nothing, particularly as it relates to GLC, and not to put the cart before the horse, because it is both a cultural centre as well as it is, you know, a conference and event centre, and we don't want to have the tail wagging the dog, just to mix metaphors, in terms of how that building is used. Once your business case says, okay, it's probably worth doing some things, but not too much, so let's say it just kind of landed at about that point, then the next stage would be to get the detailed designs done and go out and have the conversations with the community to go, okay, so this is what it would look like, this is about the amount of money it's going to cost, this is where the money is going to come from, does that make sense from a community viewpoint?
Cool, thank you very, yeah, and thank you for coming today. Appreciate your support in the process so far. Thanks again. Right, Philip, how are we going tracking, councillors? Do you want a quick cup of tea or something?
We've got 20 minutes to run.
Sure, okay. Yep. Sorry, Councillor Rankin.
must have been in that meeting when we talked about this. So we, yeah, no, so we are actively thinking about it because it's a new age, new world now.
Lovely, thanks, Christine. All right, Philip. 4 options.
While that's been going on in the background, Mornay's just pulled together a couple of slides with the overlay for you, Barry. So we'll have a quick look at how that impacts on what's currently sitting there. And I think we've.
Okay. Just before we go, Councillor Park, do you have an option?
I know Councillor Williamson is, apologies, he is a B and D.
B and D, that's a fence situation? Yep. Sorry, what? No, what? Yep. So no option? Okay. Okay, and sorry, you said Councillor Williamson? D or B, okay. All right. All right. Yeah, we need to some sort of an indication, yeah. Yep. All right, okay. Philip. Yep. So just do the quick out under
let's just quickly
overlay.
look
Now
at
the
these.
question from Councillor Hickling is how far do these encroach on that?
Yeah,
land?
so I just had a couple of people scurrying around the office frantically and turning on a few layers, so they've just emailed that through. So you can see, well, if we just flick back one to the main photo, so we've just got the site there more clearly, and then just flip over, you can sort of see where it sits. That's overlaid on the photograph, so you should be able to see pretty clearly on that screen where you're sitting, and just flicking down through those. If we get down to option C, which is the, I'll have to go and flick down. Is that just the point? How do I do this? Okay. And so option C is the one that pushes further south, but you can see clearly that sort of bottom point of the red box that's on top of the old unused bowling green.
So can you put that onto the landscape plan, the actual site plan? The actual aerial of the...
Just going back through them. Yep.
Yeah, that. So, were you talking there? Can you show us the where it... Yeah.
That point basically sits just here.
Okay.
That's the bowling green there.
Right.
And then this is the line of the
okay, cool. Thank you, Mornay.
Yep.
Barry, Councillor Hickling, are you... Yeah. Good.
one back. That's option D, yep.
D.
Well, it's more across. It's sitting essentially on top of Story Place. Yeah. So you can see that Story Place gets pushed to the north.
It's a zigzag.
Yeah. So that's kind of sitting on top of the Superloo, and then
The library next door.
yeah, you can
So
in fact see the existing tree there, just in the big tree, just to the just sitting right there. Yep.
So just quickly, I mean, explanation behind option C was a deliberate tightness between the yellow building is creating a sense of gateway into the central heart space. And that's an underlying difference between this option and the others. And again, all 4 options deliberately provoked different ideas.
Okay, well, shall we go back to option A and get any takers for that one. Yeah, sure. Councillor Jollins?
This question is to you, Shannon, and your team. When you looked at the feedback that you got, it was clear to me that option B looked like it was slightly ahead of the others. Putting your little subjective lens on, what do you think, in your opinion, made that come out on the top versus the other options? What was driving that, do you think? Does that...
Yep. If I just go to option B, it might be easier to talk to. So, what I also use, and that's a good question because I didn't rehearse because I'm going to speak truthfully because when we talked about in the last 2 weeks, and none of us had any perceptions of what the feedback would be, and it was 2 weeks that we went over and over it, there was a lot of talk about really re-engaging or establishing a potential to engage with the landing reserve, the harbour and the water's edge. This option here encouraged, not forced, encouraged people to want to be down there. Not knowing you never would have the opportunity to be able to see it from the town centre or from Tongariro Street, but there'll be a reason to go down there. So by having the potential museum, the community spaces, the CAB building, the police, the courts, and that space there, it became the gateway to, another gateway to somewhere else. The magical place that people don't really know much about. And I might be totally out of line when I say things like that, but I'm using my interpretations and also others as well, and also community feedback, that there's an amazing edge, the harbour edge and the lake isn't celebrated on that site. And I don't think you can rely just on landscaping. I remember someone during the community presentation who spoke quite loudly in the audience saying, buildings do nothing. In fact, they may hurt. Well, I don't agree. Buildings can help civilizations because we've been built up on buildings. When it's done wrong, yes, I agree. But we are doing our best to make sure this is right for Taupo. That's correct.
I think the key thing in this option is that the plaza becomes say the hub of the wheel, and everything else connects to it. What it also does is it's that strong cross connection between the northern and southern domain, and the connection of Story Place ending visually terminating in a landmark, but also the opportunity for that atrium space to be a connecting space actually that you move through. So you would actually connect the open space to the rose garden and those sections at the back there. So it's kind of a double layered connection that it does.
Was a point you made at the very beginning when we first started this exercise, was having multiple points of entry for people to come in and enjoy this space, and not having any orphan annies so that for me does deliver on that brief, and that came through very clearly in this feedback. And the other point too is I'm just thinking about the elements and where the wind and the rain and everything comes from, that this feels more sheltered.
And I'm glad you actually brought that up because it is really difficult and we probably not really think as an architect and designer that no one sees what's inside my head, and constantly for this option here I can just quickly put myself down to where the museum would be and I can see the space and spin around what it would be like. It's our job to convince yourselves and others about what that space would be. I'm glad you actually picked up the fact that this option here does expose every front door to the building. There's nothing to hide, and that's the best thing about it, because with the civic administration building, the museum space and the community spaces in here will be finally integrated with the heart space as well. And importantly, I go back to the connection with the courthouse and the police and the existing library and the GLC. They all speak together as a unified, if you want to use the term, village. because they all have front doors, and all the front doors want to be connected as one space, one unified thinking for the cultural precinct.
I might just add something, if we can just flip back to that original site slide. See on the bottom left there, that's a windrose sitting on the bottom left corner there that I put on there. And you know, you talk about elements and so on, you can see the westerly, the dominant number of days in a year that the westerly blows. The southerly actually doesn't blow quite as much, but is obviously the cold wind, but the climatic considerations of what we want to do is create an open public space that's actually usable all year round. And what option B does well is it deals very well with the westerly and the southerly, giving you that protection in that public space and also that atrium space. So it's all those considerations to bear in mind. That's for me where option D is concerning, because it relies heavily on landscape and other things to provide some kind of shelter, but it's going to be very open and exposed to the southerly and that westerly.
Rubber starts hitting the road, really. So how would you like to do this, Philip? We've got 10 minutes. So is there any takers for option A? Should we get out option A? See if there's any takers for that. Is that the way to do it? We've got to cut to the chase at some stage. Bearing in mind this is the very, very first start of the process.
Yeah,
It's a long way to go yet.
This allows the design team to develop a master plan for us to consider as one of the three options. So it's, like you say, many steps to go from here, but we're lovely to come away from today with a clear direction of which one we should develop.
Do you think there would be a benefit, because we have got slides that show or demonstrate the design team's recommendation? Or do we keep it to
option A? Yep, so we've got the 4 options up there, I think. Yeah. Yep.
Anything but C.
Right, Maggie, what would... Exactly. Yeah. John? Councillor Johns?
My preference is for option B. The reasoning being, having been through all the community feedback and then having a look at your summation of the facts, the one that I wrote down first up was B. I think it does challenge us. It delivers on a lot of the things I think I'm hearing back from the community about how they want the space to be used. And I think it's quite, I think it really resonates. The other reason I choose that option 2 is because when we look at your business case, we are looking at an option for what we're going to do with the GLC per se anyway, so that sort of just reconfirmed option B for me, so option B.
Councillor Christine? Councillor Perry? Thanks, Kristen. If you were going to pick one, it would be B. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Barry. Yeah. Councillor. Councillor Kingy. Thank you, Councillor Tong. Councillor Truman. Very good. Okay, so for the record, well, I was going to sneak out of it. Yeah, I tend to prefer option B. Certainly, the Shannon's just brought it home, that connection to the boat harbour, and Maggie said she's never been down there. Just it brings it home, and everyone will bail up. I didn't know you had a boat harbour. Who was it the other day? One of the All Blacks came through and said, I never knew you had a marina here. That sort of thing, and it really brought home to me that we really need to connect that up quite significantly. Also, I'm really concerned if there was a museum option on its own, because it just doesn't cut it. You'll get 2 visitors a day. Unfortunately, you need people running around with coffees and clipboards and all that sort of thing. You need to make the place look busy to create more people, and that's why I'm sorry, I beg to differ with Councillor Ackling on this. You do need that other activities to make the museum work. Len Lai losing thousands, beautiful museum, using thousands of dollars a year, confirmed. Napier Museum, similar operation. You need other activities around the space. So that's my initial thoughts. I am prepared to listen, going through the whole process, but option B would be my preferred option.
So, Your Worship, in that case, option B is clearly the preference. So I guess Shannon and the team will go away and go to the next level and bring that back to you for review in December, what that might look like. Obviously bearing in mind the other comments that you had around the room. Good.
Just for the record, the business case that Mr. Dunstan is doing would appreciate as much chance as we have to be able to read that and digest it before before we're sitting in chambers.
So the advantage of this being a master plan is that that whole area is looked at, and so that will all come to you in terms of what that looks like, what that could look like, and that's what we're paying these very capable gentlemen to do. So you'll get that, and then you'll have that you can then compare against those other sites that we've got for the administration building. Again, you may decide later, who knows, to not do the administration on this site but do it on another site, but you may still like the other improvements that you get to on here. So that's all still open. All that we're doing at the moment, it's not lost. It's not lost. Absolutely. GLCs, car parking, roading, absolutely.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with those facilities, but they are matured. They have matured, and yeah. Mm. Mm.
So that's where the link between the master plan and the business case needs to come together to be able to show what those things could look like.
Councillor Stewart?
Yeah, I was just because we've looked at option B and thought that's where to go. It doesn't mean that actually where those blocks are exactly in that space are going to be the exact final finish. They could move degrees and things like that, just to give comfort that we're not actually signalling to that block's going to go there, that's going to go there, and that's in exactly that shape. It could change
We've got an existing
over time. Yeah, to doing that.
Mm. And we've got an existing rose garden there too. They've got significant rose garden, so it's made around that, you know.
Okay, so that's good news, because our next step is to develop a preferred master plan. So there's detailing, as you were asking for Councillor Stewart, about the finer details of where the entrance will be, how that space will be like. Things I spoke about earlier, that's our job to translate that to convince you about this is the right space. Just for information's sake, I think for your benefit as well, I think it is worth acknowledging that the design team also reviewed based on public feedback, and importantly going back to the 6 pillars and the process we've had to date. All that is constantly reviewed all the way through. You might recall we showed a matrix of assessment, which is actually quite similar to what Kent will be doing for his business case as well. And those fundamentals don't change, because they are what the brief was asked for. We redid and re-evaluated all schemes again. We still came with the same conclusion, and it's option B as the design team's recommendation.
Very good. Thank you, Chen. Yeah, sure. Gareth, yeah, okay, so the workshop, Philip, any closing comments from you, sir?
Other than we'll look forward to coming back to you on the 5th of December is the date we've got penciled there, so we'll get that through Tina and Shaney to get it in your calendars, which will be the delivery of the master plan. So another workshop with these gentlemen to deliver the master plan and go through that in a draft format before it gets presented to us as the final master plan, one of the 3 or 4 options, including the status quo.
Okay. Thanks, Philip. All right. No, thank you, Mornay. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Kent, for coming today. Nice to see you. And everyone else. So, workshop closed. Gareth would like the councillors just in the 5 minutes in the back room, if that's okay.